Robust and high quality trainings is really important. There's a lot of access to live fire training in this state. So I think that we should be taking advantage of it and making sure that people like me, in particular, who have no gun experience, really get the training that we need to be safe gun owners. Again, asking for a no on this amendment.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 274. Will all of those in favor please say aye? Aye. Will all of those opposed please say nay? No. The amendment is not adopted. Further amendments. Amendment 286. Clerk will read.
On page 10, beginning on line 1, after sub
last
3,
line.
Strike sub 4.
The good member from the 35th District, Representative Couture, to move your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Please move Amendment 286.
It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 286 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Couture.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. One of the elements of the underlying bill that this amendment would seek to resolve is training videos that the individual would have to watch while going through the permit to purchase process. And these training videos feature people with lived experience that, have suffered maybe some gun-related crimes in the past. And Madam Speaker, I think this is concerning because this provision doesn't allow for all the lived experiences at the table. Will this video be accurately portraying not only those who were traumatized by gun violence, but also those who were saved as a result of owning and carrying a firearm, like the single mother who had to defend themselves, or people who live in extra rural areas who had to defend themselves against prowlers or wild animals? Madam Speaker, I think this training video is a slap to the face of people who are just trying to access their constitutional rights. And it also is emotionally manipulative to use the trauma of crime victims to try to steer people away from trying to obtain and own a firearm, which is their Second Amendment right. And Madam Speaker, I just think that what this will be viewed as by my constituents in my district is government propaganda. Government propaganda that they should not have to watch and should not have to endure to own a firearm. I mean, my constituents will likely not accept almost anything about this bill. But this is just that one extra step that they have to watch a video that tells them they are somewhat bad or that they are not doing the right thing because they want to access their Second Amendment rights and own a firearm. Instead of having the state government run around and create propaganda videos for people to watch to access their constitutional rights, maybe we should just start standing up for our constitutional rights and kill this bill. Please vote yes.
Are there further remarks? The good member from the 46th District, Representative Farvar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just last year, the legislature passed the Nothing About Us Without Us Act. This legislation requires the participation of folks with lived experience when making decisions about their lives. This bill doesn't ask for a requirement. It simply states the option to have folks with lived experience participate in the curriculum to enhance participants' training and experience. People with direct lived experience are experts, and they can teach us so much about the issues that they experience on a regular basis. Those issues are as broad and diverse as you and me, Madam Speaker. The voices of people with direct lived experience are an asset, not a hindrance. Please vote no on this amendment.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the body is adoption of Amendment 286. Will all of those in favor please say aye? Aye! Will all of those opposed please say nay? No! The amendment is not adopted. Further amendments. Amendment 282, clerk will read.
On page 25, beginning on line 3,
Last line.
internal references accordingly.
The good member from the 14th District, Representative Mendoza, to move your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning. I move Amendment 282.
It has been moved and seconded that the Amendment 282 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Mendoza.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The purpose of this amendment, Madam Speaker, is to protect a person who has been wrongfully denied a permit or their application. Madam Speaker, it's an honor for me to stand before you today to talk about this amendment. In District 14, we have many individuals that own ranches, they own orchards, and time again I get a constituent that talks to me about the importance of protecting their Second Amendment. I've had multiple discussions with constituents about protecting their livestock. So in Klickitat County and throughout the Yakima County, we have a lot of ranchers that raise cattle, sheep, and they have issues with mountain lions, wolves that attack their livestock. And of course, a lot of our individuals live in rural areas where law enforcement is not nearby. So it's very important for my district to be able to have a firearm. So a denial of an application, wrongfully denied, would be detrimental to some of our ranchers. And so for that reason, Madam Speaker, I ask you to vote yes on this amendment, and thank you.
Further remarks, the good member from the 34th, Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to rise to urge a no vote on this amendment. Opening up some of these immunity and liability issues is really about protecting government workers. What we know is that the good working people of Washington are trying their best every day, and what this amendment actually does is puts the onus back on these individual workers who are simply trying to process these permits. Government employees shouldn't have to be concerned about the liability of these processes, and because of that, I urge a no vote.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 282. Will all of those in favor please say aye? Aye. Will all of those opposed please say nay? No. The amendment is not adopted. Further amendments. Amendment 280, clerk will read.
On page 27, beginning on line 4.
Last line.
Internal references accordingly.
The good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall, to move your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move Amendment 280.
It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 280 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This underlying bill creates additional requirements of some of our bureaucracies. Well, one is the Washington State Patrol and the Department of Licensing. We're asking for registries. What this amendment would do is it would strip away the already onerous regulations that are being placed on our gun dealers and our small businesses. How many times do we need to go and tell our businesses what they need to do? First off, the federal government already requires a lot of this information. Second, the Washington State Patrol is unable to currently do all of the things we're asking them to do regarding firearms. We're not meeting our current obligations under the law. We all agree as a society that we want to have safety. Part of that is allowing lawful gun owners to have firearms. What I'm seeing is us trying to pass more legislation to help with public safety. And we're trying to create registries to help with public safety. What we're doing is we're doubling down on failed policy. We're doing it to make us feel good.
Speaker will remind the good member to speak to the policy. Please proceed.
This amendment will ensure that we're not creating more burden on our small businesses. This amendment will ensure we're not creating more barriers for people trying to exercise their constitutional right to bear arms, that our Constitution says will not be impaired or infringed. We don't have the authority to legislate in this manner. This is a right that was given to us by our Creator, and we cannot stand in the way. I urge we pass this amendment, and we tell the people of Washington that we respect their rights.
Further remarks, the good member from the 36th District, Representative Berry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the good gentleman just indicated, this amendment essentially guts the bill. It guts the purpose of what we're trying to do here. It eliminates the safety training, the verification, the permit to purchase records. It also undermines current law, current gun violence prevention laws that we have on the books that are saving lives every day here in Washington. Please vote no on this amendment.
Further remarks. Seeing none, the question before the body is adoption of Amendment 280. Will all of those in favor please say aye? Will all of those opposed please say no? The amendment is not adopted. Amendment 273, clerk will read.
On page 35, beginning on line 11.
Last line.
Internal references accordingly.
The good member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh, to move the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to move Amendment 273 for adoption.
It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 273 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment untangles an entanglement in the underlying bill between the constitutionally dubious restrictions that the underlying bill creates and the equally, I don't know, perhaps more constitutionally dubious extreme risk protection orders that our state has created. Basically, it says if a court issues an extreme risk protection orders, that's a ERPO, that's a red flag law, it does not have to automatically notify anyone else related to this restrictive permit that would be proposed about the red flag ERPO. Madam Speaker, we've spoken before about how the underlying policy has problems with Article 1, Section 24, with Article 1, Section 7 of the state constitution. This amendment fixes an Article 1, Section 3 problem with the underlying policy and, of course, the red flag ERPO nonsense. Article 1, Section 3 says that you cannot be deprived of any of your constitutional rights without the due process of law. Now, these ERPO red flag things, they are already troubled with Article 1, Section 3 by denying due process. The underlying policy, Madam Speaker, is also plagued by problems with Article 1, Section 3 because it has denial of due process issues in the mechanics of how this restrictive permit would be implemented. So we got a lot of trouble here, Madam Speaker. The amendment at least bifurcates the two sets of constitutional problems and simplifies the trouble to at least a one variable issue within the underlying policy. Let's focus on the due process problems and the right to keep and bear arms problems and the privacy problems that are replete in the underlying policy. Let's not add additional constitutional problems by hooking it up with the red flag ERPOs. It's a good amendment, Madam Speaker. It improves the underlying bill. I guess the underlying bill's got a lot of problems. It helps a little bit. Please vote yes.
Further remarks, the good member from the 10th District, Representative Paul.
Why, thank you, Madam Speaker. So I'm very concerned this amendment weakens public safety, weakens the ability to help protect victims of domestic violence. I've spoken to law enforcement officials. They are concerned about the impact of public safety in general, if this amendment is adopted, I really urge you to vote no.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the body is adoption of Amendment 273. Will all of those in favor please say aye? Aye. Will all of those opposed please say no? No. The amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments. With the consent of the House, the rules will be suspended, and engrossed second substitute House Bill 1163 will be advanced to third reading. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Engrossed second substitute House Bill 1163 on third reading and final passage. Remarks, the good member from the 36th, Representative Berry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The number one cause of death for children and teens is gun violence. As a mother of 2 young children, this is devastating to me. There are more guns in our country than people today in America. Every time we as parents drop off one of our children at a play date, we ask if those parents have their firearms safely secured. Every time we drop our kids off at school or go to a park to play, we hope that they come home safely and that there is not a deadly shooting in our community. When I ask my parents if this was a reality when I grew up 30 years ago in Arizona, home of the OK Corral, by the way, they shake their heads and say no. No. It doesn't have to be this way. We know that this policy works. Permit to purchase laws make sure that guns don't get into the wrong hands, that guns aren't diverted to the black markets and to more crime. Permission to reference my notes, Madam Speaker?
Please proceed.
Thank you. 12 states have implemented permit to purchase laws. Those laws save lives. Research from Johns Hopkins University shows that if Washington had adopted a permit to purchase law like Connecticut did in 1995, which was 30 years ago, we would have had 248 fewer firearm deaths by homicide and 957 firearm deaths by suicide over the last 10 years alone. The idea is also common sense because it includes training. When our children turn 16, my husband has offered to teach them how to drive. I'm really glad that I won't be doing that. That's essential to keeping them safe on the roads. And some people have a family tradition of hunting and getting taught about gun safety early. But we can't count on that. So it's common sense to require safety training and knowledge. I wouldn't dream of giving my kids the keys to our cars without them knowing how to safely drive on our roads. And I don't want our children reaching the legal age to buy a gun and not knowing how to safely handle it. Please vote yes to save lives for our kids and to end gun violence in our communities. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Further remarks, the good member from the 7th District, Representative Abel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Rising in opposition to the bill, in explaining why I'd like to talk a little bit about my district and a conversation I recently had with a constituent of mine. But before getting to that, I want to talk about a little bit of local political lore that you may be familiar with, Madam Speaker. You might remember or be familiar with the 1971 billboard that existed up near SeaTac that said, "With the last person out of Seattle, please turn out the lights." That happened during the Boeing bust at that time when there was an outflow of individuals from the area. And I want to talk about that with regard to my district in a second. I represent the 7th Legislative District, the largest, most rural district in the state. It's one of 3 legislative districts that border the state of Idaho. It comprises a lot of small towns, ranches, farms, and individuals who live out there largely because they want to live out there. They're attracted to a rural lifestyle, and it's important that they be able to live the lives in the way that they want. I recently had a conversation with a constituent. He sent me an email, and like you, Madam Speaker, I suspect that you receive hundreds, perhaps thousands of emails that Many of them appear to be kind of form emails, very similar. This email was radically different. It was just a couple of lines. It said, Representative Abel, I live in your district. Tell me why I should stay in this state. That email did not merit a form response. That email necessitated outreach from my office that let's have a conversation. It's a long ways from here back to the 7th District, Madam Speaker. I drive a lot, so I talk a lot on the phone. He and I set up an appointment, and the conversation revealed deep concern that this constituent had about the direction this state is, and really a state of heartbreak because he chooses to live in my district, here in our wonderful state. He's got the ability to leave, and frankly, he was very strongly considering leaving. I asked him to stay, make the same decision that I've made on behalf of my family, to say, this is where we're going to be, this is where we're going to fight out on behalf of our values. And one of the biggest issues that he identified was this bill, Madam Speaker, which he views as deeply contrary to his beliefs and the beliefs of the people of my district. I believe this bill is bad for a number of reasons, Madam Speaker. I believed it was bad before the conversation with my constituent. I believe that even more so now. It's bad as a cultural matter. It's deeply contrary to the values of the people of the 7th District who have a long and well-known history of responsible gun ownership and responsible exercise of their Second Amendment rights. My district is also home to 3 federally recognized Native American tribes. For many enrolled members of Native American tribes within my district, the use of firearms is an
Member has
opportunity
30 seconds.
to engage in subsistence and provide food for their family. It's also a bad bill as a practical matter, Madam Speaker. We have predators in my district. Cougars, wolves, bears, and individuals need firearms in order to protect them and their family from these predators. It's also bad as a constitutional matter, which we've already identified. I ask, Madam Speaker, that this bill be defeated. Thank you.
Further remarks? The good member from the 25th District, Representative Keaton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to this bill. There are more guns than people in this country. There's over 300 million legally owned guns. If legal gun owners were the problem, we'd be reading every day in the newspaper about multiple shootouts at Tombstone, Arizona, at every small town in our state, every county in our state, every city in our state. Legal gun owners aren't the problem. I rise for all the veterans in this room, both sides of the aisle, that have defended the Constitution and the people's rights to own and bear arms. But mostly, Madam Speaker, I rise for myself so that when I hear the testimony, which I'm going to hear from the mother whose daughter was trying to escape an abusive relationship, which happens way too often, way too common. And she finally breaks away from that abusive relationship and goes to purchase a gun and has to wait and wait and wait. What am I going to tell that mother? The only thing I can tell her is that I stood up today so that death would never happen.
Further remarks? The good member from the 46th District, Representative Farvar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Up until a few weeks ago, I was the youngest member of this body. My generation has grown up in the shadow of gun violence, in the shadow of active shooter drills, of mass lockdowns due to shootings. And now as an adult, I still live in fear. Every night in my neighborhood of Lake City, there are gunshots. They keep us up. They confine us to our homes as an unofficial curfew. This is not freedom. This is not what my parents came to this country for. My neighborhood, my city, Washington State, this is an all-American melting pot. People from all over the world come here seeking a better life. But how can we interact with each other and learn from one another if gun violence keeps us trapped inside and robs us of our lives? This is why I'm voting yes, Madam Speaker, and why you should join me. Because this legislation will lift that unofficial curfew and let us sleep. It will allow law enforcement to do their jobs. It will ensure that everyone who decides to purchase a firearm understands the capabilities of of the machinery they hold in their hands. It will ensure people understand that this machinery can rob people of their safety, their freedom, and their life. So join me, Madam Speaker, in voting yes and give me and my neighbors our freedom back.
Further remarks? The good member from the 25th District, Representative Jacobson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We've heard several sort of categories of arguments against this bill. We've heard some logistics arguments. We just now heard in favor of the bill that people are fearful to leave their homes because of gun violence. I would suggest, Madam Speaker, to answer that we need to be careful about letting people early out of prison, and we need to be careful to fund our Washington State Patrol so that they can, for instance, get the backlog of DUI testing done so we don't have to drop charges against people who commit crimes. So, Madam Speaker, the three buckets that we've had are the logistics argument, and we're hearing that this is just common sense under the logistics argument that we train people, but yet we don't allow our military men and women to just skip the line and not take this training because they're far more trained than any small class could provide. When I used to teach math at Pierce College, at the beginning of every class, I would always identify who was going to be in charge in an emergency. And I always asked for a law enforcement officer or a former military officer so that if we had an emergency in our classroom, that person could take charge. In 10 years of teaching math, often 3 sections a quarter, I never failed to have a military person or a law enforcement person stand up to take that role. They're ready, they're trained. So those logistics arguments are there. We heard about funding arguments about the Washington State Patrol, and I just mentioned how they're not even able to test the backlog of cases about DUIs, and they're far behind in their work. And we are the lowest per capita amount of police officers in this state in the union. And so we've got a big job we're putting on them, in addition to all the people that are getting let out early with some legislation that we're passing now. The other dollar argument is for the people that are trying to get the permit. So when best days of my life, when we had our 7 littles and we had 1 income and we were home raising those littles, the concealed carry permit, which is not the same thing but a similar idea, was $50. And I never picked one up. $50 was too much for us. So I think that we need to be very careful for constitutional rights having a big price tag on them. And I think that we are infringing people's constitutional rights by having
20 seconds
extra expenses. So we've got the Second Amendment and Article 1, Section 24 of our own Constitution guarantees us the right to the defense of ourselves and by extension our family and other vulnerable people. And so therefore, Madam Speaker, for these 3 buckets of reasons, I urge a no on this bill. Thank you.
Further remarks? The good member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This may be the worst bad bill we've seen so far this session. Please vote no. Madam Speaker, there are 3 constitutional defects with this bill. First, it violates your due process rights. That's Article 1, Section 3 of the Washington State Constitution. Second, it violates your privacy rights. That's Article 1, Section 7 of the Washington State Constitution. And third, it violates your right to defend yourself with a firearm. That's Article 1, Section 24 of the state constitution. And Madam Speaker, it probably violates other portions of the state constitution. Madam Speaker, we have heard that the reason to support this bad policy are primarily want and fear. Madam Speaker, wants and fears do not dominate or overtake or undermine your constitutional rights specifically enumerated in our founding document. Madam Speaker, we have heard that there are gunshots and violence around our state. Madam Speaker, I put it to you that that is because we have been undermining the right of lawful people to defend themselves for a decade plus. And rather than acknowledging the failure of these policies, that they have enabled criminals to act more recklessly and with greater disregard for civil society, we're doubling down on the same failed ideology. Enough, Madam Speaker, enough. When I was first elected to this position almost a decade ago, Madam Speaker, an angry and intemperate person threatened my 3 daughters. He said to teach us a lesson about abortion, he was going to rape my daughters. Now, he was probably just an unhinged individual, but my daughters may have exercised their constitutional right to self-defense. Madam Speaker, my daughters may have legally obtained concealed pistol licenses. Of course, I would recommend to them never to say whether they had or not.
30 seconds.
My daughters may carry firearms to defend themselves. They may carry a Glock 19. They may carry a Kel-Tec 380. I don't know, and if they did, I would tell them not to advertise that. But, Madam Speaker, my daughters have not been raped. My daughters have not been molested. My daughters have not been killed.
The Speaker is out of time. Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the body is final passage of engrossed second substitute House Bill 1163. The Speaker is about to open the roll call machine. The Speaker has opened the roll call machine. Has every member voted? Would any member like to change their vote? The Speaker is about to lock the roll call machine. The Speaker has locked the roll call machine. The clerk will take the record.
Madam Speaker, there are 58 yeas, 38 nays, 2 excused.
Having received a constitutional majority, engrossed second substitute House Bill 1163 is declared passed. The House will be at ease for a few moments.